Okay, welcome to video number 3 in the Old World Geographical Model for the Book of Mormon. Just to recap my first two videos, in video number 1, I made the case that Lehi circumnavigated Africa in 600 BC. He did not sail to the New World. Therefore, he ended where he started, and the rest of the Book of Mormon takes place in the Old World. We know that because Herodotus described the sailor, and he also described the geography of Africa, and that is all repeated in the Book of Mormon, especially in Alma 22:32, where the geography is the same as Herodotus Book 4, as I described in my first video. So please go back and watch that one if you haven't already. In video number 2, I made the case that the first leg of Lehi's journey in the wilderness is from Jerusalem down to Suez and then over to Cairo. So I made the case that from the Red Sea to the continually flowing river is from Suez to Cairo, and that 3-day journey is documented by Karsten Niebuhr in 1761. And you can go back and watch that video if you'd like to learn more about that if you haven't already. I claim that the continually flowing river that Lehi ended on is the Nile. That is the only solution for a river near the Red Sea. There are no other candidates. And the problem with it flowing into the Red Sea is solved with the Canal of the Pharaohs. So please go back and watch that second video for more information on that. Before I go on to the meat of this video, which is from Cairo to Elephantine Island where the river camp is, I just want to go back to 1 Nephi chapter 2 verse 8. And I just want to add something that I think I forgot to add. This is all concerning the Canal of the Pharaohs and how it is the fountain of the Red Sea. So it says, "And it came to pass that he called the name of the river Laman, and it emptied into the Red Sea." And then he says something very odd, very clumsy. "And the valley was in the borders near the mouth thereof." So rivers are in valleys and they flow into the mouth, which is at the sea. So why do we need this phrase, "and the valley was in the borders near the mouth thereof"? So this phrase is only necessary if we are distinguishing the difference between the mouth of the fountain and the mouth of the Nile River. The mouth of the fountain is in the Red Sea. The mouth of the Nile River is somewhere else, but they are near each other. So that's what this verse is trying to say. It's actually distinguishing the difference between the mouth of the fountain and the mouth of the river. "And the valley was in the borders near the mouth thereof." The borders, I'm going to show in future videos, is consistently referring to the land between the Nile River and the Red Sea. So that is the borders. Later, when the family travels in the borders, I'll show again how that is in the land between the Nile River and the Red Sea. And here, that's exactly where the Canal of the Pharaohs is, in that land between the Nile River and the Red Sea. So stay tuned for more information on that. So, I just want to point this out again, the possible route of Lehi's journey in the wilderness. This is on the church's website, and they show the possible route. I want to kind of mention something here. This theory and my theory both have a problem. And the problem is that the Book of Mormon is very vague at times. It's odd because sometimes it says they took a 3-day journey, which is very specific. And then other times it seems like they could have crossed hundreds of miles without any mention at all. And that is clear if you read the Book of Mormon. You're going to see that problem here. We don't have a detailed description of this journey down, this proposed journey down the Arabian Peninsula here. So it's very vague at times. And my theory, before I get into Elephantine Island, my theory has a solution for that, and I've kind of listed it right over here. And I found this to be very consistent. Later I'm going to talk about how the journey is the same as the dream. So the Tree of Life vision is a map of Africa, and it's a map of Lehi's dream. And so that's kind of why those are here next to each other. But right now I want to point your attention to my little code that I've come up with that explains why the Book of Mormon is so detailed in some places and then how it gets so vague. My theory is that basically they could have said, our journey is up the Nile River. And they don't need to describe anything else. You get on the river and you go up the river and you reach the destination. But the problem is sometimes you're off the river, and when you're off the river, that's when the day's journey is used. So the first leg doesn't have a day's used, so that's a problem with my theory. But that could be just because this was so well traveled. So from Jerusalem down to Suez is on land. Then the 3-day journey from Suez to Cairo is well documented in my last video. The 3-day journey, that would be overland, the same journey that Karsten Niebuhr took. And then now we're on the Nile River, and that's when it gets vague. We have a lot of land covered without using the phrase 4-day journey or 3-day journey, and that's because we're just on the Nile River. And so that is my personal explanation, and that's consistent with my entire map and my entire theory. So I'm going to be coming back to that and pointing to that in future videos. So that is my explanation for why it's so vague and why so much land can be covered when it's vague, and then we have these specific parts. That's because they've left the river and now they need the explanation for how many days it is that they are off the river. So this video is from Cairo to Elephantine. So that part is very vague. That part is not described because it's on the Nile River. So going back to the map, that would be from Cairo to the river camp here on Elephantine Island. So what is Elephantine Island and where is Elephantine Island? Also, I don't know if I'm pronouncing everything correctly. I use some pronunciations. I say Elephantine. I've heard it several different ways, but that's what I say. So hopefully that's going to be okay with you. Okay, if we look at a Google map, my theory is that the journey from Suez to Cairo is the 3-day journey. That's overland. That's why we have the days listed. Then the journey on the Nile River is not listed. It's very vague, and so that's just because you're going up the Nile River. So you would come up the Nile River to modern-day Aswan, right here, and that is where Elephantine Island is, right here. This is my river camp for Lehi, right here on Elephantine Island. And there are 2 major reasons why I believe this. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about these reasons, but my point isn't really to go into a lot of detail about these reasons. My point is to point out that the evidence for the Book of Mormon is right here on Elephantine Island. So the 2 things I'm going to talk about, I'd encourage you to look into them yourselves much more than what I'm going to talk about in this video. So the first is on Elephantine Island. You can see here on the Wikipedia page, if you scroll down, you'll see Elephantine Island, Jewish presence. So if you read this, you'll discover that on Elephantine Island there was a community of Jews at the time of Lehi. And so this is a direct hit for Lehi, if you consider that he was on the Nile River. So we have this city, this presence of Jews right here on Elephantine Island. And we know that because they built a temple. In the 5th century BC, we have Papyri that describes the temple is in disrepair and already needs to be rebuilt. And scholars and professionals and experts, often they'll say, yeah, we assume that these Jews came at the destruction of Jerusalem. They were fleeing the Babylonian destruction and they came down to Elephantine Island, and that's when they set up their community here and built their temple. And they say, well, man, it would sure be nice to have another papyri or to have more information on these Jews. And it seems to me that that information is in the Book of Mormon, and no one's noticed it. Because no one has noticed that Lehi clearly came down to the Nile River. People haven't connected the dots that when the Book of Mormon says that Lehi camped on a river and that he built an altar of stones, in approximately 600 BC, no one has connected the dots that is evidence of who built this Jewish temple in Egypt on the Nile River on Elephantine Island. So that to me is a direct hit to Lehi's altar of stones. If you want to go back to verse 7 of chapter 2, 1 Nephi chapter 2, verse 7, and it came to pass that he built an altar of stones. So stones, because it needs to be made out of stone, according to Mosaic law. You can go into the Bible and read about how the altar is to be made. But this altar of stones is clearly the first description of the Jewish temple that is found in ruins, archaeological finding, on the island of Elephantine in the Nile River. So that seems to be a direct hit. Here's a YouTube video. I'll leave the link to this YouTube video, and right around about 8 minutes they start talking about this, and it's very insightful. And I encourage you to watch this video to learn more about the ancient temple on Elephantine. Of course, these people don't associate it with what I'm saying. They have no clue that it's Lehi or any association to Lehi or the Book of Mormon. And in this video, they talk about Isaiah 19:19. So I'll pull that up and read it real quick. It says, "In that day shall there be an altar to the Lord in the midst of the land of Egypt, and a pillar at the border thereof to the Lord." So I wanted to point this out because in that video I just showed, they speculate that this is the reason the Jews believed they could build a temple in Egypt. Clearly the Jews, the mainstream Jews, only have the one temple in Jerusalem, and it's odd that there would be a second one discovered. But if you take this prophecy from Isaiah and you remember that the temple in Jerusalem is destroyed, and it says, "In that day shall there be an altar to the Lord in the midst of the land of Egypt, and a pillar at the border thereof to the Lord," Elephantine Island fits that perfectly. It's in Egypt, and it's at the southern border of Egypt, and that's what they talk about in that video. And there's more here too, because the 5 cities in Egypt, that's something Jeremiah says in Jeremiah 44, which I'm going to do a whole video on. So that's connected to Lehi's departure from Jerusalem as well. So I encourage you to look more into this. It seems to me to be a direct hit of evidence to my theory. Lehi's on the Nile River. The Jewish temple that has been discovered is talked about in the Book of Mormon. It is Lehi's altar of stones. You don't have anything like that over in Arabia. So this would be a far better candidate than anything in Arabia. The second thing that is so special about Elephantine Island here in Aswan is that there has been a piece of papyri. There were lots of papyri discovered for Elephantine. They're called the Elephantine Papyri, and that's how we know about the Jews that live there. And they even talk about the temple in the papyri, and you can they've pieced together almost exactly where everything in the city was. You know, from the corner of this house to the temple was this, and so they have it all mapped out, and you can look into that on your own. But here, this is a BYU article written by, where's his name? Jeffery R. Chadwick. And let me just read the abstract. The Book of Mormon name Sariah does not appear as a female name in the Bible, but has now been identified in a reconstructed form in an Aramaic papyrus. A Jewish woman living at Elephantine in Upper Egypt during the 5th century BC was identified as Sariah, daughter of Hoshea. So what we have here is a BYU article talking about how special it is that they have discovered evidence for the name Sariah as the name of a female, because that is not in the Bible, and that was not known to be the case. And now they are discussing how they have found evidence for it if you read this article, they talk about finding it on a piece of papyri and a piece of pottery. And they are using it as evidence that the Book of Mormon is correct when it has the name of a female as Sariah, but they are completely missing the point that this is evidence for Lehi on Elephantine Island at this time, and that is his river camp. So you can read this article and you can look into that. But my point is that they've totally missed the point. They've found evidence on Elephantine for Sariah, but they've totally missed the point that that's more evidence for Lehi living on Elephantine Island as part of his journey in the wilderness. Obviously, this Sariah is not the Sariah in the Book of Mormon. This Sariah comes later, and so it would have been like a descendant, or just a name that's used by that specific group of Jews living on that island. But the point is, they found this evidence on Elephantine Island, so I don't see any reason why this can't be used as more evidence to support my theory, which is that Lehi was on the Nile River, and Elephantine Island right here is the river camp because of the altar to the Lord and Sariah. And then I just wanted to point out this YouTube video. So this YouTube video is from Scripture Central, New Archeological Evidence for Sariah as a Hebrew woman's name. So they point to Elephantine Island. They show a picture of it, and then they talk about the papyri and the pottery, and they say how great it is that they have discovered this, not connecting the dots that this is on Lehi's journey. Again, they have Lehi over in Arabia. They don't have Lehi over in Egypt where I have him. So that seems like a pretty hardcore bullseye to me, and that's why I think that is Lehi's river camp. So that's my third video. I hope you liked it. Come along. I'm going to talk about the next thing I want to talk about is the Tree of Life vision, which happens right here at the river camp in Egypt on the Nile River. So my fourth video will be starting to talk about the Tree of Life vision. I hope you watch it. Thanks.